I don't think that the sanctions will work if by work that means that the Iranians will look at these new constraints on their banks or new constraints on their individuals and say, okay, game's over, we will stop enriching uranium. I do think that it makes sense to have a dual track. That is to say, you try to increase the sanctions as a form of pressure on Iran at the same time that you keep the door open to dialogue. And the idea is that that dual mix, that you sort of put the pressure on, but you also say there is a way out of this, let's talk, let's see if we can find common ground, is the right way to go. Because it seems to me that the Iranians need to be given a push toward dialogue, and the sanctions, the sense that they are isolated in the international community, is a way of giving them that push. I don't think so, because there was a fairly strong vote in favor of the sanctions, and the no vote from Brazil and Turkey was a function of the complicated diplomacy surrounding Turkish and Brazilian intervention, the deal that was struck several weeks ago to export a certain amount of uranium to Turkey. I think the Turks and the Brazilians felt that they were mistreated, that they, to some extent, had been asked to go make a deal. They succeeded in making a deal, and then they were criticized for doing so. So I think their vote was more about disgruntlement over the diplomatic game than it was about the sanctions per se. Well, I think that the domestic politics of Iran are very complicated, that the Green Movement to some extent feels that they're not getting enough backing from the international community, in part because the international community is treading very carefully. It doesn't want to so alienate the government that it closes off the option of dialogue. To that extent, I think the sanctions will be seen by the Green Movement in a mixed way. But it will to some extent be welcomed because it shows pressure on the government. On the other hand, I think there are those in the Green Movement who aren't in favor of isolation, who aren't in favor of sanctions. So I think there will be divisions. If the sanctions don't work, and Iran continues to move down a path of enriching uranium and perhaps becoming close to a breakout, that is to say acquiring a nuclear capability, then I think there are two basic options. One is to learn to live with that capability, to deter Iran, to try to prevent proliferation in the wake of Iran breaking out, and the other would be for some kind of military action carried out by we don't know whom. I think both of those outcomes are very negative. I am not someone who would be happy about a nuclear Iran. You often hear the claim that nuclear states are very careful. Nuclear states are very prudent. I'm not sure that an Iran with nuclear weapons would be all that careful or prudent. I don't want to find out. At the same time, I think a war against Iran would be an extremely dangerous gambit. It could begin a process of knock-on effects, use of violence, attacks on Western targets, attacks on Israel that could be very, very dangerous and harmful to the international community. And that's why at this point, I would say let's do as much as we can to find a diplomatic compromise, because both a nuclear Iran and a war against Iran are so ugly that we need to do everything in our power to avoid those two outcomes.